name is Leila. I'm 29 years old, and 3 months ago, at my grandparents' 50th anniversary dinner at a restaurant in Oakville, my brother stood up and announced in front of 42 people that he had been named the sole executor of our grandfather's estate. He'd had the documents notarized 6 weeks earlier. I found out the same way everyone else did, sitting at a table with a glass of sparkling water in my hand, watching him smile. Nobody looked at me, not even my mother. I want to tell you what happened after that. But first, I need to take you back a little further, because the ending only makes sense if you understand what came before it. I am a forensic accountant. I work for a mid-sized firm in Toronto, and what I do, specifically, is find money that people have tried to make disappear. I audit paper trails. I reconstruct transactions. I sit with spreadsheets the way other people sit with novels, reading between the lines, looking for the sentence that doesn't belong. It's quiet work, invisible work. The kind of work that doesn't come up at family dinners because nobody quite understands what it is, and my brother had decided long ago that not understanding something was the same as it not mattering. His name doesn't matter. I'll call him what he called himself at that dinner, the responsible one. Our grandfather built a small but real estate portfolio over 40 years, 3 rental properties in Hamilton, a commercial unit in Burlington, and the family home in Oakville where my grandparents had lived since before I was born. He did it working weekends, driving his own maintenance truck until he was 68, keeping meticulous records in a ledger he updated by hand every Sunday morning. He was the kind of man who knew the difference between an asset and a liability and never confused the two. Our grandmother was sharp and generous and had a laugh that filled a room completely. She had a ceramic studio in the basement. She grew tomatoes. She remembered everyone's birthday without writing it down. By the time of the anniversary dinner, she hadn't been in the basement in 8 months. She sat at the end of the table in a wheelchair she had only needed since January, and she smiled at the right moments, but her eyes had a lag to them that I noticed the way I notice things, quietly, from a distance, without saying anything yet. I was seated beside her. My brother was at the other end of the table, beside our grandfather, who was 81 and moving slowly, but still tracking every conversation with both eyes. When my brother made his announcement, Grandpa nodded. A small, careful nod. The kind you make when something is being said that you already agreed to but didn't fully understand at the time. I watched that nod for a long time after dinner. 3 weeks later, I took a vacation day and drove to Hamilton. I want to be clear about something. I did not go looking for a crime. I went looking for a discrepancy, which is different. A discrepancy is just a number that doesn't fit where it's supposed to. Sometimes there's a simple explanation, sometimes there isn't. You don't know until you look. I pulled the property title searches myself through the Ontario Land Registry. It took about 40 minutes at a public terminal. What I found was that 2 of the 3 Hamilton properties had been transferred out of my grandfather's name 14 months earlier. The transferee was a numbered company, 2133 Ontario Inc., registered 6 weeks before the transfers with a single director, my brother. The transfers had been made for $1 each, which is legal when there's a family relationship and a gifting intention. The question is whether the intention was actually there, documented, and understood by the person doing the giving. I sat in the parking lot of the registry office for a while. It was February. The car was warm. Outside, the sky was the flat gray that settles over southern Ontario in winter and doesn't lift until April. I didn't call anyone. I drove home and I made a list. What I had: 2 transfers, 1 numbered company, a grandfather who nodded carefully at announcements I wasn't sure he had fully participated in making. What I needed: the gifting declaration, the independent legal advice certificate, and the date my grandfather had last seen a doctor who wasn't referred to him by someone in our family. This is the part where I have to tell you about my mother, because she is woven into all of this in a way that took me longer to see clearly. My mother is not a cruel person. I want to say that plainly. She loves her grandchildren. She volunteers at her church. She makes preserves every fall and gives them to the neighbors. But she has always believed, without examining it, that my brother is the one who handles things. He's older, he's a man, he went into finance. In our family's unspoken accounting, those 3 facts added up to authority, and authority had a way of making oversight look like love. She had co-signed things. I found that out later. She had co-signed things she told me she didn't fully remember signing. I did not confront her. Not then. What I did was book an appointment with my grandfather's original lawyer. Not the one my brother had used for the estate documents, but the man who had drawn up Grandpa's first will 20 years ago, who had a small practice in a strip mall in Hamilton and still used a paper calendar. His name was Mr. Whitfield. He was 74 years old and had known my grandfather since they were both coaching minor hockey. I brought the title search printouts. I brought a copy of the incorporation documents I'd pulled from the Ontario Business Registry. I set them on his desk the way you set evidence down when you want someone to look at it without being told what to see. He read slowly. He didn't rush. Then he set his glasses on the desk. Isla did the transfer documents, he said. He meant the other lawyer. She's got a solid practice. But she would have needed a gifting declaration signed independently. He paused. Your grandfather would have had to appear in person without your brother present and confirm he understood what he was giving away and received nothing in return except the relationship. I asked if he knew whether that had happened. He said he didn't. He said he would make some calls. 2 days later, he called me back. There was no independent certificate on file. The declaration had been witnessed by a paralegal at the same firm that registered the numbered company. In Ontario, that's not necessarily illegal, but it is a problem if the grantor later says he didn't understand the nature of the transfer. It's a much larger problem if there's any question about capacity. I asked Mr. Scar Whitfield what he needed to file an application with the court to have the transfers reviewed. He told me. I wrote it down. Then I went to see my grandfather alone. This is the part of the story I think about the most. Not the legal filings, not what came later, but the afternoon I drove to Oakville and sat at the kitchen table with Grandpa while he made tea the way he always had. Loose leaf, steeped exactly 4 minutes. Poured into the same ceramic mugs my grandmother had made in the basement studio 20 years ago. He sat across from me. He looked tired in a way that was different from old. Not worn down by age, but by something more specific, more recent. I didn't ask him about the transfers right away. I asked him how he was sleeping. I asked if he was still doing his crosswords. He said yes to both, but when I asked him which one he'd done that morning, he paused and said he thought it was the Globe, and then he said he wasn't sure. I said his name. I said I needed to ask him something directly, and I needed him to tell me what he actually remembered, not what he'd been told. He put his mug down. I asked if he remembered signing documents, transferring 2 of the Hamilton properties to a company. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he remembered signing papers. He said his son, my uncle, but he meant my brother. He mixed them up sometimes now, had explained it was for tax purposes. He said he thought it was something to do with the estate plan. He said he had trusted that it was the right thing. I asked if anyone had explained to him that he would no longer own those properties, that they would belong to a company he had no shares in. He looked at his mug. He said no. He said he thought it was just a formality. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. I said I was going to fix it. I said he didn't have to do anything. I said I needed him to trust me the same way he'd always trusted me when I was small and had come to him with something I didn't know how to carry alone. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "You always did the math, Leila." I had to leave the room for a minute after that. Here is what I did not do. I did not call my brother. I did not send a message to my mother. I did not post anything, mention anything, or give any signal that I was looking at anything at all. I went home. I contacted the lawyer who specializes in elder law in Toronto, someone Mr. Whitfield had recommended, a woman with 30 years of experience and a manner so calm she made you feel like everything was already handled. Her name was Ms. Okafor, and the first thing she said when I laid the documents in front of her was, "When did you notice the cognitive changes?" I told her. She nodded like I'd confirmed something she'd already suspected. "We're going to file for a capacity assessment," she said. "Independent, court-ordered. In the meantime, I'm going to file a notice of application to set aside the transfers. That doesn't reverse anything today, but it freezes the titles. Your brother can't sell, can't refinance, can't borrow against them until the court decides." She looked at me over the papers. "Has he started marketing the properties yet?" I said I didn't know. She said, "Let's make sure he doesn't have the chance." The application was filed on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, my brother had received notice. I know because he called me at 6:37 that evening, and the first thing he said was my name in a tone I hadn't heard since we were teenagers, and I'd found the report card he'd forged our mother's signature on. "What did you do?" I let the silence sit. "You had no right," he said. Grandpa agreed to this. It was his decision. "You don't know what conversations happened. You weren't there." I said I was aware I hadn't been there. I said that was part of the problem. This is jealousy, he said. This is you not being able to accept that he trusted me. I said I wasn't sure someone could give trust they didn't know they were giving. He hung up. My phone showed 4 more calls from him in the next 20 minutes. I didn't answer. My mother called once at 8 p.m. I let it go to voicemail. Her message said she hoped we could all sit down and talk like adults. She said she was sure there was a misunderstanding. She said my brother was devastated. I listened to it twice. Then I made dinner and went to bed. The capacity assessment happened 6 weeks later. My grandfather was assessed by 2 independent physicians over 3 separate sessions. Neither of them was connected to our family or to anyone my brother had recommended. The results came back in writing, and the written summary noted cognitive decline consistent with early to moderate vascular dementia, with particular deficits in complex financial reasoning and retention of multi-step verbal instructions. In plain language, my grandfather had not had the capacity at the time of signing to fully understand what he was giving away. Ms. O'Coffer filed the supplemental materials to the court the same week. The transfers were voided. The properties returned to my grandfather's name. The numbered company was effectively a shell with nothing in it. My brother did not take this quietly. He hired a lawyer, an aggressive one, the kind who writes letters designed to feel like a wall closing in, and for 6 weeks I received correspondence suggesting I had interfered with a family matter, that the capacity assessment had been improperly influenced, that my grandfather's long-standing relationship with my brother constituted a valid expression of testamentary intent, and other phrases that were designed to sound authoritative and meant almost nothing. Ms. O'Coffer replied to each letter, briefly, without drama, the way you answer something when you know the other side has nothing. Then came the dinner. My mother called and asked if I would come for Sunday dinner. Just the family. She said she wanted everyone in the same room. She said Grandpa wanted to see me. She said my brother had agreed to be there and that she hoped we could all find a way forward. I went. I want to be honest about why. Not because I believed the dinner would be productive. I went because I wanted to sit in that room one more time, knowing what I knew, and I wanted to see what they would try. My brother was already there when I arrived. He stood when I came in. He had the expression people wear when they are performing goodwill. The specific softness around the eyes, that is not real softness. That is the shape of the face someone makes when they have decided that softness is their best remaining play. He said he was glad I'd come. He said we needed to talk like family. My mother set food on the table. My grandfather sat at the head in his usual chair. He looked better than he had in February. He had color. My brother waited until we were halfway through the meal. Then he set his fork down and said he wanted to propose something. He said he'd been thinking a lot. He said he understood now that the transfers had been done in a way that hadn't been clear enough, and he took responsibility for that. He said he wanted us to resolve this without the courts, without lawyers, without it becoming something that damaged the family permanently. He slid a document across the table. It was a family agreement. In it, my brother would regain management authority over the 3 Hamilton properties in exchange for a structured profit-sharing arrangement, with my name listed as a beneficiary receiving 12% of annual net revenue. 12% of properties my grandfather had built over 40 years. In exchange for ending the legal proceedings, I picked up the document and read every line. My brother watched me. He was trying to read my face. People always try to read my face when I'm looking at numbers, and they always get it wrong. Because the face I make when I'm reading numbers is the same face I make when I'm reading anything. Level, quiet, giving away nothing. I set the document down. I said I had a counteroffer. I took a folder from my bag. Inside was a summary prepared by Ms. Okafor's office and a supplementary report I had put together myself over the previous 3 weeks, because when you are a forensic accountant and someone has been managing your family's real estate for 4 years, you have a professional obligation to look at the books. What I had found was not subtle. Over 4 years, my brother had been collecting rental income from the Hamilton properties into a personal account. Not a trust account, not a numbered company account, a personal checking account in his name, and had been using it to service a home equity line of credit on his own house in Mississauga. The total amount was $214,000. He had also filed the income as personal income incorrectly, without notifying my grandfather that the rental revenue existed, which meant my grandfather had been unknowingly depriving the CRA of revenue on property he still legally owned. That last part was the part I slid across the table. I watched my brother's face go through 3 different expressions before it settled on the one it would stay at for the rest of the evening. I said I wasn't there to negotiate management rights. I said the properties would remain in Grandpa's name and would be managed by a property management company, a real one, licensed, bonded, reporting to the estate's trustee, until Grandpa decided otherwise. I said I had filed a referral to the CRA the previous week. I said the audit was already open. I said there was also an outstanding question of a fiduciary breach, which Ms. O'Coffer had prepared materials on, but I was willing to let the CRA process complete before deciding whether that became a separate civil matter. My mother made a sound I hadn't heard her make before. My brother said my name. Just my name, the way people say it when they have run out of other words. I said that I had one more thing to tell him. I said that over the previous 2 months, while I had been pulling records, I had also been in contact with one of the tenants in the Hamilton properties, a woman who had lived there for 11 years and who had been paying her rent reliably into an account she thought belonged to my grandfather. She had tried, twice, to reach my grandfather directly about a repair that had gone unfixed for 8 months. Both times, she had been told by the person managing the property that my grandfather was unavailable and that her concerns had been passed along. They had not been passed along. The repair was a heating issue. In January, in Hamilton, my brother looked at the table. I stood up. I said I hoped dinner had been good. I told my grandmother her soup was wonderful, because it was. I kissed my grandfather on the top of his head. I told him I would call him in the morning. I drove home on the 403, and somewhere between Mississauga and the city, the weight of the previous 4 months lifted in the specific way that weight lifts when you have done something that cannot be undone, and it was the right thing. The CRA audit took 7 months. At the end of it, my brother was assessed $214,000 in unreported income plus interest and penalties, which came to just over $290,000. He was given 18 months to pay it, which required him to refinance his house. The home equity line of credit he had been servicing with my grandfather's rental income was closed. The fiduciary breach claim was filed the following spring. Ms. O'Coffer prepared it. It settled out of court. My grandfather received a structured payment of $175,000, which Ms. Nollers, Okafor helped establish in a proper trust, administered independently with a professional trustee and quarterly reporting. My brother had no role in it. My grandfather's estate documents were redrawn entirely by Mr. Meter, Whitfield, with independent legal advice certificates, capacity assessments on file, and both my mother and I named as co-executors. My mother did not speak to me for 6 weeks after the dinner. Then she called one morning in April and said she needed to say something. She said she had known something was wrong for a long time and had looked away from it because looking away from things involving her son was something she had been doing for 30 years and she didn't know how to stop. She said she was sorry. She didn't use the word fully. She said it partway and then stopped, which I think was honest in its own way. I said thank you. I said I knew it wasn't easy to say. I meant both things. We are not where we were. We are not close in the way I had hoped we might someday be. But we talk on Sundays now. She updates me on my grandfather. I update her on my work, the part she can follow. It is a quiet kind of careful, and that is more than I had before. My brother and I have not spoken. I am told through my mother that he is managing. I don't wish him badly. I genuinely don't. But I also know that the version of me who would have swallowed the anger and signed the 12% document and told herself that keeping the peace was worth more than keeping the record straight, that version of me is gone. She left somewhere on the 403 that night and I haven't missed her. My grandfather is doing well, everything considered. His dementia is progressing slowly. Some mornings he knows every face in the room. Some mornings he gets the names mixed up. But every time I visit before I leave, he finds my hand and holds it for a moment, and he says the same thing he said that afternoon in the kitchen in February. He says, "You always did the math." I'm sitting at my desk now, in my apartment in Toronto, and outside the window, the city is doing what it does in October. Bright and sharp and a little bit heartbreaking. The way things are, when you know they're about to change. I have a cup of tea. The case files are in a folder on the shelf. The properties are being managed properly for the first time in 4 years. I want to say something directly to you because I think some of you have been in a version of this room. Not necessarily with real estate, not necessarily with a brother, but in a room where someone handed you a document and smiled, and the smile was designed to make you feel like questioning the document was the same as questioning the family. Here's what I know. Being quiet is not the same as not noticing. Watching and waiting while you gather what you need is not passivity. The people who underestimate you because you don't perform your intelligence, because you don't announce yourself, because you work in the margins and the spreadsheets and the things no one else wants to look at. Those people have made a calculation and they are wrong about the math. They forgot what forensic accountants actually do. We find what was moved and when and where it went. We follow the number that doesn't fit. We sit in the quiet and we read the document all the way to the end, including the footnotes, including the line at the bottom that someone hoped you'd miss. I didn't miss it. I never miss it. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. And if you have ever been the person in your family who was handed the small piece, the 12%, the crumpled ticket, the seat at the far end of the table, I want you to know, quiet is not weak. Patience is not surrender. And the math always, eventually, comes out right. I've spent a lot of time thinking about why it took so long for anyone to look, not me. I looked the moment I saw Grandpa's nod that night at the restaurant, that small, uncertain nod that told me he was agreeing to something he hadn't fully understood. But everyone else in that room had also seen the nod. My mother, the cousins, the family friends who had known my grandfather for 30 years. They saw it and looked away, because looking away had become the path of least resistance, and least resistance had become the organizing principle of how that family dealt with my brother. I don't say that with anger anymore. Anger was what I felt in the car driving home from Oakville the night of the dinner, when I was still processing what 14 months of unchecked access had produced. What I feel now is something quieter, more like clarity. Here's what I've come to understand. The people who exploit the trust of others are rarely the loudest or the most obviously dangerous. They are usually the ones who have learned, very precisely, which rooms they can walk through without being questioned. My brother had been walking through those rooms his entire adult life. He knew how to hold a document at the right angle, speak with the right amount of authority, reference the right amount of authority. He had perfected the performance of being trustworthy, which is a very different thing from being trustworthy, and the difference had cost my grandfather $214,000 and 8 months of a heating repair that should have taken a phone call. What I keep returning to is this: the math was always there. The numbers didn't hide, the Ontario Land Registry didn't encrypt anything. The CRA didn't require a court order for an audit referral. Everything my brother had done was traceable by anyone willing to sit down and actually trace it. The protection he was counting on was not complexity. It was the assumption that no one who loved the family would want to find it. That assumption was wrong. I think about Grandpa at his kitchen table, telling me he thought it was just a formality. I think about him handing over a cup of tea, loose leaf, steeped exactly 4 minutes, into a mug my grandmother had made with her own hands, while not knowing that 2 of the properties he had spent 40 years building were already registered to a company he had no shares in. I think about the tenant in Hamilton calling twice about the heat in January, being told her concerns had been passed along. The cost of looking away is not abstract. It lives in the specific, in the coal department and the confused old man and the ledger updated by hand every Sunday that someone decided they could quietly redirect. I'm not a hero in this story. I'm a person with a professional skill set that happened to be exactly what the situation required, and I used it. That's all. But I think there's something in that worth sitting with, the idea that the things we're good at, the quiet, unflashy, detail-oriented things that don't get mentioned at dinner parties, those things matter. They matter in ways that can't always be anticipated. My grandfather used to say that good work makes itself known eventually. He meant it about real estate. He meant it about maintenance. He meant it about everything. He was right. Take care of the people who can't take care of themselves right now. Trace the number that doesn't fit. Read the document all the way to the end, not because you're expecting the worst, but because attention is a form of love, and love, when it's real, doesn't look away.